Hi everyone, this is Tyler Aquarius, and I'm here with Joy Voigt, the author of Fox Woman Dreaming. I'm so excited to talk to her about this new book, which is available now either as an ebook or as a gorgeous physical copy. Um, Joy, how are you doing today?
So I am really happy to be here. I'm feel privileged to be in your presence and getting to share a little bit about the book. So thank you for your time. Yeah.
Same, same. This is going to be great. Let's dive right in. Without, spoiling the plot of the novel, how would you just briefly give a synopsis of Fox Woman Dreaming?
God, this is always the hardest bit, isn't it? So you only spent a year writing it. Now say it in like a blurb. I hate this part. Okay. Well, the story follows a woman named Sybil, and Sybil is having some dreams basically, where she is connecting to a wilder part of her, a part that has been basically repressed through her work as a dream maker in the company. So she's having basically the story follows her journey from being someone who doesn't have access to her voice to having this really weird, bizarre experience for 3 days with this very particular character that kind of snaps her back into her own connection with herself. And so it's the journey of a woman, of a person, really a person, reconnecting with their own voice. I'd say I'd say that's the blurb, and then there's all this other stuff that's in there. But
Yeah, yeah. Well,
that's
and I have to say, as a reader, I read a lot of fantasy and science fiction, and I always have. And I thought that the plot of the novel was so compelling and actually very different from anything I'd read in that genre before, while still being really entertaining. It's a really entertaining book to read. So kudos for
Oh,
that.
thank you.
I'm wondering as well, what inspired you to write this book? What was the impetus behind writing Fox Woman Dreaming?
Well, I don't know how you deem creativity, but I think for me, there's something about creativity that isn't about like myself, like joy as an individual. It's like some kind of grace that pops into us, and then we're like, okay, use me. I think the moment that we start thinking that creativity is ours, hubris starts to hit, and then we start hitting blocks and all these different things. I know for myself that the more I open up to life using me in its own creative, bizarre ways, magic can happen through me. Like really, like the Rumi idea of being a reed flute, just empty out and then life blows in whatever bizarre things it wants to blow in. And for me, it was Fox Woman Dreaming, and it was literally like that. I was in Mexico, and I was lying in my bed. And I remember it very clearly. I was like, the sun was coming onto my leg. I was lying down, and I was listening to Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Do you know her? The woman
Yeah, yeah.
who ran with wolves. And she had this little podcast, or not a little podcast, a really beautiful podcast. And all of a sudden, she said this word, dream. I don't even remember the rest of the sentence, but she said the word dream. And I had this memory of when I was 23 of having this thought, I'm going to write a novel one day about a company that writes dreams, that makes dreams. And I remember, I can even tell you the journal. I can even tell you where I wrote it 10 years before. And I was like, oh, I need to write that novel now. And literally, it galloped into me. That's the only way that I can say it. Like I was lying there and I was like, this story, half of the story, like the first half of the novel, just like entered my system. And I was like, I had plans, I had stuff to do. I guess I'm writing a novel. Okay, boom, 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 So the first half, that's how it came around. It was just, life took me.
That's amazing. So it came to you really 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Um,
true. The seed idea. Yeah, the
the
seed.
seed, yeah. That's fascinating. Like as I think any creative person can attest to, we all have, writing down little notes of ideas here and there in all these different notebooks, and you
Yeah.
lose the notebook or you like move on with your life. And I bet all of us have, 100 unwritten stories, but the fact that this one came back to you,
Mm.
that's really special.
Yeah, I feel
Did
lucky.
you did you have dreams while you were writing it?
Mm, like about the content,
Like
like
about, yeah, about the story.
I wouldn't say dreams like in like falling asleep and thinking about it, but I remember having very lucid experiences with the story. Like I like this in a similar way. Like I would be, I don't know, cooking or something like that, and these things would just like gallop into my head. That's the only way I can say it. Like they felt like
The
wild.
galloping.
Yeah, they feel like wild mares, and I was like, okay, I'm trying to like get on the wild or actually run next to her. No, there's no domestication of a story. I think you just get to run next to a story if you're
Yeah.
lucky. um, but it wasn't so much dreams like in sleeping, but I do remember a very vivid lucidity with it. Like we were in dialogue, that story and I, for the months that it was being written. Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
How long did it take you to write the novel from start to finish?
Well, I was in Mexico and it was a pandemic, so what lucky timing, because what else is there to do? Sit down and like be alone and write some stuff. Very productive time, the pandemic, I think, for a lot of
Yeah, definitely.
you wrote a book too, actually.
It's true, it's true.
So the first half, the first bit, basically up until Sybil meets Ty, actually, a character who is in part based on you. Just so you know. Um, so that first bit, basically about 6 weeks, I just was writing every evening. For me, my creative time for that particular book was the evening. And I wrote. And I remember, I mean, I think, I don't know if this is true for other people who write or create, but I know that there was a definite process of learning about myself through this character, Sybil. So I wouldn't say it's autobiographical, but there are definitely streams of me learning about myself through this character's passage through these ordeals. And I remember I was writing and it was like, oh, I don't actually know what can happen next because I haven't learned this in myself. Like I don't know, I haven't evolved enough. I've come to this point in my journey that this is all I know. And if I wrote more, it'd actually be all like straw. It wouldn't have the content of depth, the other things I know about, because I've been through them, so I can write about them. But from here on out, I don't know this journey. So then I needed to wait for a whole other year, have probably one of the worst winters of my life, get absolutely broken open. And this is so beautiful because it really reminds me of the beauty of friendship, and how books and how everything that we do creatively is not, on our own. I think I wrote on Facebook once that, it says Joy Voigt as author, but really it's a collective process. Just one person decided to write on a computer. But I had two midwives, and this is a shout out to them, because Jonathan Back, who's my editor, and Michael Fields, who's my friend, we sat down and we had a couple of phone calls. And then one day we went out to the woods, Michael and myself, and we just sat by this mossy stone and this waterfall. And he just asked me these questions. And then it was like, oh, I know what the rest of the story is, because it's actually happened in me. Like now I know how it gets resolved. And I remember the same thing. I just went out into the woods, sat by the water, and I was like, oh, okay, I know how it finishes. Wrote back some notes, and then in 2 weeks it was done. I just finished writing it in Washington, Bellingham. So that was the process.
Wow, it sounds really mystical,
Yeah,
the whole experience. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
that's beautiful.
yeah.
And I'm wondering too if there were any rituals when you would write, uh, not even in like the superstitious sense, but what do you need in order to write as far as your surroundings or your preparation?
Mm. I love that question because it's like, um, I think as any creative person, I think it's a really good question to ask yourself. Like Virginia Woolf, when she speaks about having your own room, like
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
it's a very important question. Like, what do I actually need as a human to have a creative process? It actually speaks of self-love, self-care, boundaries. Like I think it's a question that's very indicative of the depth of how you actually take the creative process to be. So it's a beautiful question. Like I think it's a question that says like, what does it mean for you to love and take care of yourself? So I mean, I'll answer it, but I think the depth is that, like
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's a question we should all ask ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
um, whether it be work or creativity, or how do I need to cook, or what does it look like to be with your kids? Like how do I create the space to be deep in intimacy with myself? So for me, I'm definitely an introvert, even though I appear as an extrovert. I am definitely an introvert, and creative processes are 100%. Like I cannot write if there's other people around me doing stuff, like I couldn't write at a coffee shop. Like I love sitting at a coffee shop and getting ideas, like watching people and then writing and jotting down. But when I'm actually going to write, I need to be like facing a wall. There can be nothing. Very, very focused and concentrated, and just having the sense that there's nothing that's going to interrupt me. Like it's a very, very contained, intimate place, and there's a sacredness to it. And I really like the words that you use, like the ritual. I haven't thought of it like that, but I think I want to implement that too. Like, yeah, there's a ritual to converging with parts of that creative mind inside oneself. So yeah, my ritual is facing a wall. Very holy stuff.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I do think it's different for everybody. I really enjoy a coffee shop. For some reason, if I'm in my personal space, I have a lot of trouble like engaging the process. Whereas if I'm in a place with a lot of noise and activity, it cancels something out in my brain. I don't know. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's important to note that everybody has different needs, you know.
And it's part of like our user manual. I think as one of our like responsibilities of being a human being is like, what do I actually need in general, to
Yeah,
be satisfied with what I do. So I hear that you
yeah,
found yours, and that's awesome. you
yeah, yeah. I love it. Cool. So this is not your first writing project by any means. But previously you've published poetry. You've done a lot of memoir writing, obviously writing lyrics. Is this your first time writing fiction? Is this your first fiction project?
um well, I studied literature and philosophy, which is kind of random. Weird. So when I was younger, I loved writing. I really, really loved writing, like a lot, a lot. And I had, your classic notebooks all over the place and stuff. But I didn't feel very, I hadn't found my voice. And I think that's an important process. There's something about writing and being fake to a certain extent, or trying different things out. I think that's the way I want to say it. Not fake, but you're just trying different things out. So I never felt connected to anything I'd written before. One time I was in India, and I felt another novel creep into me. Like it just kind of inhabited me. And I was sitting down and I was writing it, but my computer just died. And so the whole, there's something about technology and creativity where those two also kind of have to meet.
Yeah,
Computer
yeah.
dies and the creative juices are flowing. It's very difficult. So there is one novel that I was writing before that just kind of it stayed in India on the shores of like the Indian Sea in Goa.
Yeah.
Maybe one day she'll come back to me and visit, but I really liked it, but
Yeah,
it just
yeah.
computer. So in terms of like a complete fulfilled like A to B novel per se, this is my first novel, but I've written a lot. Yeah, I love writing. I love writing. Yeah.
How would you say that writing fiction, writing a novel, differs from your experience writing poetry or memoir?
Mm. Mm. I'm having this. So I'm writing a, a writing journal prompt with Danny Sherrard. Little project that we're not a little project. It's a project that we're working on. And one of the prompts that I was thinking about was try different genres. And like write a little news report and write it in a haiku, and write the same idea in a long poetic prose or something like that. And what I was thinking about genres is like they're kind of like prisms, you get to explore an idea through different lenses. And what I discover is that I have a different voice. Like when I'm writing poetry, there's something very, I feel very sacred on the land of poetry. Like I feel very reverential when it's poetry. And there's a very like demure part of me that comes out. And with writing fiction, I feel a lot more profane. I think that's
Yes.
like,
Oh yeah.
there could be like, because you can write these long paragraphs that, if they're not really like in a poem, if you write like nonsense in the middle of the poem, is like, dude, like that's, you have these many lines. You can't just be wasting lines, and in a novel, you can kind of like wiggle over your way around it. So there's a lot more like like leisure to be able to be a little silly and yeah, profane. I think it brings out
Yeah.
more of that side, a little bit of my more silly side. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's definitely way less limitations, and while poetry, the limitations of poetry, that form can be so can actually be really liberating.
yeah.
With my experience writing fiction has been that the tendency is to write way too much, and then to have to go back and be like, that's not necessary, that's not necessary, that's not necessary. But reading Foxwoman Dreaming, I don't think it will surprise anyone who reads it that you are a poet as well, because there's an economy of words in it, as far as it feels very efficient, and yet you have these moments where you do allow yourself to kind of dip your toes into poetry again, and it's just really it's a really special thing to see. I think especially in this genre of text, we don't see that all the time, so it makes it very special.
No.
So thank you for that.
Thank you. No blush. Thank you.
Yeah. uh on that note, I also want to ask, I mean, I know the answer to this question. Are you an avid reader?
Nah.
Yeah, books, whatever. Take it from me,
Whatever.
though.
I am. I spent
Yeah,
about
yeah,
a decade where I didn't read because I was just in a monastic setting and I chose not to read. But truly, truly, I think my nature, my character does is a very curious one. So I do love reading. I always have a book. I'm always reading something, except for my 20s. I chose
yeah.
actually not to read.
Wow. And who are some of your favorite authors or even genres of books to read?
Tom Robbins. I think anybody who's read Tom
Hmm.
Robbins can tell that I am very deeply influenced by him, 100%. Tom Robbins, Martin Shaw, also
Hmm.
amazing. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, of course. I really like nonfiction about mythology, like reading
Yeah.
about myths. Like the person I was reading, whose name I just completely blanked out on. Well, that's embarrassing.
Whatever, mythology, it's in the collective unconscious. It doesn't really belong to anyone anyway.
Oh my gosh. Well, this incredible. I was reading like some of the research that I was doing for the book because I really wanted the Fox Woman Dreaming to have a historical basis, and so I was reading From the Beast to the Blonde, written by this amazing woman whose name I cannot remember now. But I was using her that book in particular as a reference for fairy tales and for history. So every fairy tale that's in the book is actually all of the names are some of the earliest historical versions of that particular fairy tale. Like Blanchette is the oldest name for Little Red Riding Hood, and so on and so forth. So I really love nonfiction too about mythology. That's one of my like pet themes that I've always loved reading about. So
Yeah. Yeah, on that note, I mean, mythology is all over this novel, and specifically, like you said, the fairy tale mythology. So I'm wondering, what are some of your favorite tales, or the fairy tales that sort of found their way into this novel?
hmm, interesting question. I was really lucky to have a very eclectic father who read me the Greek myths when I was a kid. I mean, dang,
That's
that
heavy.
is so heavy. That was so heavy. Full
Yeah.
fantasy mythology. I could even smell the book. I can see it in my mind's eye. That particular edition in that book, like my dad would read me that. So obviously that really informed Fox Woman Dreaming, like a lot of it. Um, but fairy tales per se, I think I'm definitely more of a myth person more than fairy
Yeah.
tales. That's kind of it's interesting to me that I decided to go for fairy tales instead of myths. But I think it's because I was reading this particular woman. She was talking about fairy tales, and I really wanted to. I was so the book the From the Beast to the Blonde. It was so good for me. I was like, I am obsessed with this book that I needed also to express it creatively to process some of the ideas that she was saying. So I think that's why I ended up choosing fairy tales. But if I were to choose one fairy tale as my favorite, have you know Bluebeard? The one.
No.
Oh gosh, I'm not
Is
gonna.
is he a pirate?
No, it's this man who has a
Oh,
big beard, who's like he gets 2 sisters to live up in the tower with him. I'm completely gonna botch the story because I
yeah,
don't
yeah, yeah. Fair
really
enough.
know, but the youngest sister basically is super curious and, has a key and finally opens the door, and there's, like, all these cadavers, and Bluebeard ends up being, like, this really bad guy. Whew, that's an intense story, one to think about for a while. I think that's probably my
Yeah,
favorite 'cause it's creepy. I think
yeah.
it's so creepy.
That's funny about the fairy tales though. I find that I misremember them. Like just as you're telling me about Bluebeard and you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna botch this." Like I don't know if I can like retell the story. I feel that way about some of my favorite fairy tales. Like the other day I was trying to remember one that involved like a man who went into this cave with all these crystals, and I think there was some sort of demon or something, and it's so wild that it's this really potent story for me that I can remember. Um, I can remember the shape of it. I cannot remember the details to save my life,
Mhm,
which
mhm.
actually I think says a lot about the power that these tales have to kind of work themselves in subconsciously.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I love that. I mean, I get very excited about that, what you just said, because yeah, they do function at an archetypal dreamscape place. I think that's why fairy tales are so potent, and that's why I chose fairy tales, because I'm actually, it's one of the things that really interests me very deeply as like an aspect of research, and that like they touch an archetypal part, even if you don't remember the details or the flesh out. It's like you remember like an echo of a dream, and then your own life kind of fills it out. Like that's the beauty of fairy tales. They get told and told and told, and so they get mixed with the story of the person who's telling it. So the teller and the story get mixed in together. And actually that's also one of the reasons why I chose fairy tales for the streams, the conduits for storytelling. Is like the voice of the teller and the story, they get mixed in together, and it's like, what does it look like to tell a story from your own voice? Like what would that sound like, so yeah, that whole part of orality, and the fact that stories get told through many generations, and every generation tells it in their particular way, I think is really fascinating, really, really fascinating.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it is.
All right, so I think we're going to take a little break. And when we come back in part two, we're going to really dive into the meat of some of the characters that you created in Fox Woman Dreaming. We'll see everybody soon.